Today we're at the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery, and we're here to tell the stories of some of the men who lay here. The Meuse Argonne American Cemetery is the largest American cemetery in Europe, holding more than 14,000 dead. We're going to have a look at tell some of the stories here today, look at a few of the men who lay here. Now there are thousands of men, as we've said, 14,000, but we're going to tell the story of just a few of them today. Let's go take a look. And here's where we're going to start. We're going to tell the story of a Medal of Honor winner. This is the grave of Irvin Blackley. We're going to tell his story. On the 26th of September 1918, the 50th Aero Squadron flew its first missions as part of the Meuse Argonne offensive. On the 6th of October, they were tasked with flying support missions to try to drop supplies to the Lost Battalion, part of the 77th Division. After their first attempt on the morning of the 6th of October, they returned to their base having had little success. They'd come under fairly heavy fire, small arms fire from men on the ground, German soldiers who were firing rifles at the plane. They were warned by their squadron leader, Captain Daniel Morse, that a second attempt would be even more dangerous and hazardous. Blackley responded to that with, "We'll make the delivery or we'll die in the attempt." Despite the warnings, they took off again for a second attempt. The pilot was Lieutenant Gottler, with Second Lieutenant Blackley serving as the observation officer in the back of the plane. This time they flew low across the treetops in an attempt to draw German fire, hoping that identifying where the German fire were coming from would then in turn identify exactly where the Lost Battalion was to be able to drop supplies. As the plane came under increasing fire, including machine gun fire from the Germans, the pilot Gottler was hit in the head and killed. The plane crashed and Blackley was thrown from the aeroplane. He was unconscious, but he'd survived. He was rescued by French soldiers, but unfortunately he died when they were trying to take him to an aid station. Blackley and Gottler both received the Medal of Honor, and Blackley is buried here in the Meuse Argonne Cemetery. Next up, we're at the grave of another Medal of Honor winner, Freddy Stowers, and we're going to tell his incredible story. Freddy Stowers was born in South Carolina. He was drafted into the Army in 1917, and he was assigned to the 1st Battalion of the 371st Infantry Regiment. On the 28th of September 1918, Freddy and his unit were tasked with assaulting a heavily defended German position during the Meuse Argonne offensive. The German defenders offered stiff resistance, but then they put forward signals to suggest they were going to surrender. As the Americans approached the German trenches, it turned out that was a trick, and the Germans opened fire on them, causing devastating casualties. Freddy Stowers' senior officers had been killed in the attack, and that left him in charge of a heavily battered and demoralised platoon. Freddy began crawling towards the German position, urging on his men to join him and follow in the attack. They moved forward and captured that position. During that attack, Stowers was hit by German machine gun fire, but carried on moving forwards, urging his men to attack. He was hit again and collapsed due to the loss of blood and was killed. Shortly after the attack, Freddy Stowers was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but that recommendation was never processed. Now you might wonder why. Well, that's because one key piece of information that I haven't shared with you yet is that Freddy Stowers was black. He was part of a segregated unit serving during the Meuse Argonne offensive. In 1990, a review was conducted and Freddy's recommendation was uncovered. On April the 24th, 1991, 73 years after Freddy was killed in action, Freddy's sisters were awarded the Medal of Honor by George W. Bush at the White House. His surviving sisters, Georgina and Mary, received the medal on his behalf. Okay, so we've just arrived at the chapel here, and like many American cemeteries, the chapel is where they have the names of the missing remembered on the walls. Let's go have a look. So just before you enter into the chapel, they have a big map here on the wall, which is great because it really helps you understand the Meuse Argonne offensive. You can see all the different divisions that were involved, and you can see a map of the actual offensive itself. That really is fascinating. It just helps you understand, you know, some of the detail of the conflict that we're looking at here. One thing which I've noticed, which is quite cool, is in the stainless glass window, they have all of the different divisions who fought into the conflict worked into the artwork in the glass. Wow. That's really cool. When you come out of the chapel, they have either side the names to commemorate the missing during the offensive here. Now, this isn't just from the Meuse Argonne offensive. This also includes names of those who were missing during the US expedition to northern Russia in 1918 and 1919. But all of the names of the missing are on the walls here. Now, there's a couple of interesting bits to point out whilst we're looking at it. Next to some of the names, you will see a little symbol like we have here next to the name of Albert Parker. Now, that normally will distinguish a medal, and in Albert Parker's case, that is the Distinguished Service Cross. Something else which we get here next to the name of Vincenzo Parise, you see over on the right-hand side like a small kind of rosette. That means that whilst he was initially named here as missing, his body has since been recovered. And so the rosette goes next to the name. The name itself isn't removed, it stays on the wall, but they have the rosette added to the wall here. Across the two panels, there are 954 men commemorated here who are missing and have no known grave. The next story we're going to tell is that of Oscar Miller. Oscar Miller served in the army prior to the Great War in the Philippine-American War. He later left the army and he worked in the Postal Service in Little Rock, Arkansas. In 1917, when the Americans entered the war, he resigned from his job and rejoined the army. He was serving as a major not far from here in the Meuse Argonne offensive. In September 1918, Oscar Miller was leading his unit in an attack against a fortified position, and during that attack is when he won the Medal of Honor. And his citation reads, "After 2 days of intense physical and mental strain, during which Major Miller had led his battalion in the front line of the advance through the Argonne forest, the enemy was met in a prepared position south of Gonesse. Though almost exhausted, he energetically reorganised his battalion and ordered an attack. Upon reaching open ground, the advancing line began to waver in the face of machine gun fire from the front and flanks and direct artillery fire. Personally leading his command group forwards between the frontline companies, Major Miller inspired his men by his personal courage, and they again pressed on towards the hostile position. As this officer led the renewed attack, he was shot in the right leg. Nevertheless, staggered forwards at the head of his command. Soon afterwards, he was again shot in the right arm, but he continued the charge, personally cheering his troops on through the heavy machine gun fire. Just before the objective was reached, he received a wound to the abdomen, which forced him to the ground, but he continued to urge his men on, telling them to push on to the next ridge and leave him where he lay. He died from his wounds a few days later. So we're not just visiting Medal of Honor winners today. We're going to end our little visit here at the grave of Eddie Grant. I'm going to tell his story. Eddie Grant was born in 1883 and he was a professional baseball player. He played in the Major League between 1905 and 1915 as a third baseman. He was one of the first men to enlist after the Americans entered the war in April 1917, and he became a captain in the 77th Division. During fierce fighting in the Meuse Argonne offensive, all of his superior officers were either killed or wounded, so he took command of the remaining men in a 4-day search for the lost battalion. During that search, a shell exploded and killed Eddie Grant. He was the first Major League Baseball player to be killed in the Great War, and he rests here at the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery. I hope you guys enjoyed this visit to the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery. Now, as I mentioned, there are 14,000 graves here, and we've only visited 4 of them. Now, of course, we can't tell the story of every single man here, but I've taken the time to walk around and visit a few of the other graves, and we've been in the chapel and looked at the memorial to the missing. If ever you're here in the Meuse Argonne area near Verdun, I certainly suggest that you come and check out the largest American cemetery in Europe. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.